Hey everybody, this is Operation Moksha. I'm Chris Roscoe, and again we have a good friend Julie. I pointed this way last time and it ended up you being over here. And today we're going to be talking about something a little bit more specific, and we're going to try and cover some ground here. We're going to be talking about the media. We're going to be talking about some biases you may not have known about in media, like either left-leaning or right-leaning, and we're going to talk about how you can actually start to understand where those biases are coming from and how they show up. And then we're going to start talking about the impacts that those biases have on our minds, on our relationships, and on our culture in general. So why don't you actually, for anybody who, since this is only the second episode, why don't you give us an intro into you and your work and what you're all about and what exactly we're doing here?
Yes, so my name is Julie Mastrine. I work for AllSidescom. We are a website that frees people from their filter bubbles so they can better understand the world and each other. So we do that by providing media bias ratings. So we rate the bias of hundreds of media outlets so that you can kind of orient yourself when you're reading the news, when you're consuming the news, so you can understand what biases are at play when you're consuming that information. We have a huge emphasis on civil dialogue. And we display the news from all sides of the political spectrum. So for any given popular news story, we'll show you what those on the right are saying, what those in the center are saying, and what those on the left are saying. Yeah.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And just hearing that description, I'm so honored to get to have these conversations, because that is such a strong value of mine. And I know that there's a minority of people that have really strong values in this stuff, and to know that at least somebody's trying to actually create a platform for this kind of conversation to happen is just, it's really cool. It's one of those things where it just feels like we're making something that I wish someone else would have made. So this is awesome.
Yeah. We're definitely responding to problems in not only the media and the way that human biases create content that is biased, but also bias in our algorithms, bias in our technology, which I can talk about more in depth.
Yeah, that reminds me, did you see that thing I posted on, or I piggybacked off someone else's? It was like where you type in racist Democrat
Yes.
on Google, and then you type in racist Republican, but then that was weird. My Google Home next to my thing just started freaking out as soon as I said that.
That's weird.
I can't make that shit up. That's super weird. Anyway, so let's start talking about the media.
Yeah.
So what would be some examples of some media outlets that are biased in ways that we may not necessarily understand? Like before we started the call, you were talking about was it New York Times?
Yeah. So, I mean, it kind of varies according to individuals. I know that for myself, when I was a journalism student, I thought that the New York Times was an unbiased, objective news outlet that was really adhering to the principles of journalism, which objectivity is a huge principle, and was making sure to show you both sides of an argument or both sides of an issue, displaying numerous perspectives on an issue, just making sure that we get the full story. And it was really surprising to me as my own thinking evolved and as I started to, become aware of websites like All Sides, that the New York Times is not a center outlet. I think they're a very trusted news source in America, or at least they were for a long time. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about today, but it's become clearer to folks who are studying this in groups like All Sides that they're very biased to the left. And we did and the interesting thing about news outlets is that their bias can shift over time. Like maybe in the past they were center, but as things evolve and things change and you get new people in there working and maybe they have certain political views and they're approaching their news stories from a certain angle, you get more biased content or you get the bias shifting. So yeah, the New York Times, we recently did a editorial review of the New York Times. We have multiple methodologies at All Sides for how we assess the bias of an outlet. But one of the ways we do that is by doing editorial reviews. So we get people from all sides of the political spectrum, like a committee basically of people who are on the left and the right and everywhere in between. And we get together and we actually read the outlet over time, and we take note of, you know, what are the words they're using? Like, what information are they omitting? What are they being sure to include? What types of photos do they use to like paint a picture? Are they using emotional words in their headlines? Are they kind of melding emotion with fact to kind of lead the reader to make a certain conclusion? Are they interviewing folks that have a different opinion? Like, are they giving some spotlight to the more fringe views? I mean, and like how fringe? So there's a lot of things that go into like determining the bias of an outlet. A lot of it is what stories they're even choosing to cover. Just like not only how they're writing, but what they're writing about. So
interesting. You said some things in there that made me think. It's like I do notice reading right and left stuff. I notice people on the left use certain buzzwords and people on the right use certain buzzwords.
Yeah.
You may not have this off the top of your head, but can you think of any buzzwords that are real easy to be like, oh, this is likely right-leaning or this is likely left-leaning? Like, are there any that really stand out?
I mean, for me personally, I don't know, if there are definitely buzzwords that are like rooted in certain ideologies.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the thing that stands out to me more are like emotional words, like Trump exploded yesterday, or that's something you'll see on the left. They're talking about how he exploded, or words that are just not just Trump said, right?
Yeah. Whereas on the right, they might say, "Oh, he dismantled this journalist." But
Yeah.
They'll be like, "Oh, he blew up on this journalist."
Yeah, and then you know just other things it's mostly those like emotional words, but you have to know how to spot them, and just when a word is being used to paint a picture, and like, is that picture accurate, and is that word being used to make me feel a certain way? Because if Trump erupted, then I'm going to be like, oh, like this guy isn't safe, he's angry, he's explosive, he's not level-headed. And people do, and then this is where perception comes into play, because people do believe that about Trump, and that so to them saying he erupted is accurate, but to somebody else they might be like, well, he just said this thing, where are you seeing the eruption? You know what I mean? So bias is very subjective. I might view something one way and somebody else views it another way. But in journalism, the role of the journalist is to really avoid emotional words and words that are very it's more about like being careful about just how we're painting these pictures, and what's fact and what's interpretation.
It's so funny to hear you say that, because it's like I have this faint memory of hearing my parents talk about journalism this way, but that's so foreign to pretty much any journalism I've ever seen. Like, I don't see anyone doing anything close to that anymore.
No, and I don't think I really credit my like journalism professors. I studied journalism for a few years in college, and it wasn't until like being out of that and like I learned these principles that were like, I mean, it was like the heart and soul of journalism was like, you know, being fair and always interviewing both sides and leading with facts, and just knowing how to distinguish fact from opinion is, I think, is something that Americans are actually not good at. And I think the media is partly to blame, because they will frame an opinion as a fact. We actually found during our editorial review of CNN that on their homepage, they will have a variety of headlines, and they'll intersperse opinion articles with, so an editorial, or an op-ed rather, an opinion piece will likely have a title that is an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So like the headline isn't stating a fact of what happened, it's stating an opinion. But CNN will intersperse opinion pieces on their homepage with hard news. So it looks to the reader like that is a fact. Like, oh, here's the news, this happened, and, you know, then this opinion piece is thrown in there and it looks like a fact.
Mm-hmm.
And it's muddying our ability to discern, or rather it puts a lot of responsibility on the individual to be able to discern what's fact and what's opinion. But Americans aren't good at that. And there are surveys that show that when given statements that you have to say whether it's a fact or an opinion, a lot of Americans, like a shocking number of Americans, get it wrong.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
so just for an exercise, in case there's anybody watching this who's like, maybe I don't know the difference. Like, let's just go over the difference real quick between a fact and an opinion.
Yeah. So, I mean, a fact is, it's an objective statement. I actually even want to like look up the definition so that
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah,
I don't.
in my head, I'm thinking it's like there's two people on camera right now is a fact. And
yeah, exactly. It's like you can observe it, and this is where things start to break down, because you could say, yeah, there are two people on camera right now. Fact. We can like observe that. This is sort of but then you could also say there are two people on camera spouting off right now. Like, so you can see the opinion part of that. Like, are we spouting off?
Yeah.
Like,
what does that even mean?
So opinion is when you have like a judgment about something.
Yeah, like an interpretation. Like,
right. Yeah.
This is a canteen. This is a great canteen.
Yeah.
How does anybody know it's great?
Exactly. And so I saw recently a quiz that we published on All Sides, where it would give you statements, and they were political statements, and you had to say whether or not it was a fact or an opinion.
I want to take that quiz.
Yeah, we should maybe post it as a resource.
I'm going to put it in the description. So make sure you send it to me so I can put it in the description wherever I post this.
Yeah, so you can select if you think it's a fact or an opinion, and then it'll compare your results with that of the rest of Americans. And it's kind of shocking how many Americans can't tell the difference. I mean, and the statements were things like, you know, immigration is a positive aspect of America, or something like that, right?
You could easily see someone think that's a fact. Exactly.
Yeah, and it's an opinion, and there were lots of other examples as well, or you know, but then you could say something like, you know, the First Amendment of the Constitution protects free speech, like fact.
Yeah, fact.
But then you say free speech is a virtue that is required for a healthy and thriving democracy.
If you're on the right, that's a fact.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But I think some people don't think that's true. I think that that's, you know, it's an opinion. Like
it's for sure an opinion, but like it's so easy because people will take that as.
Yeah.
It's like, obviously that's important. Like, what the fuck are we gonna do without it? Okay. So,
yeah.
I want to see if we can. Like, can you give me an example? If you can, off the top of your head, 2 examples, like far left, center, right, far right, just so we can get an idea of what the spectrum looks like.
Yeah. Do you mean media outlets that fall under those? Yeah. Or yes. Okay.
So let's start far left. And first, let's distinguish what far left even is.
Yeah. So we have the definitions on our site. Basically, sources with a left media bias are most likely to show favor for things like increased government services, federal laws protecting equal rights, tax increases on the wealthy, a belief that all humans have the right to healthcare, housing, clean water, a living wage, believing that the government should really protect us from suffering, things like that. We have a whole list of this on our site. Increasingly, views on the left include like bans on hate speech, a belief that systemic oppression exists and the government needs to step in and rectify it.
So how do you distinguish that from far left?
So we've talked a lot about how we distinguish left from lean left, and it's something that we're still trying to sort of perfect, but the line can be very, kind of murky. Yeah, so we've written out a document that helps us to determine, and a lot of it has to do with, like, do they ever display opinions that are more center or right? Like, do they ever publish anything or any opinion that is, contrary to their views? Do they ever give any lip service to it? To what degree do they use sensationalism? To what degree do they use emotional words? Things like that. So it's more like degrees of extremism, really.
Right. These are honestly, like, I wouldn't have thought of these. These are fantastic distinctions. So what's an example of far left? What's a far left media outlet?
Yeah, so I actually want to fact check that I have this right before I say it, because I think it would surprise a lot of people, because it surprised me, but I want to make sure that the Huffington Post, far left.
Really?
We used to have them as lean left. And yeah, we did a review and moved them to far left. And I think that, the Huffington Post is one of those outlets. I feel like sometimes when I Google anything, the Huffington Post comes up in like the first 5 results. And it's all over my, feed, and people often share things from the Huffington Post. The Huffington Post, far left.
Yeah, Huffington Post, I mean, at least in California, or at least in Northern California when I lived there, is like fucking gospel. Like, people love the Huffington Post. I didn't realize that was classified as far left. That's cool.
Yeah.
So are there any more? Because we talked about Vice. Is that
Vice.
Pretty fair to say far left?
Yeah, Vice is far left. So we're actually, and another thing I should state is that we're coming out with a chart that actually has, and this would also be something to probably link in the description.
Yeah, will it be ready?
That has, what was that?
Will it be ready?
Yeah, it's ready. We're planning to roll it out to everyone within the next month. I'm happy to send it to you. It's actually already been published on at least one website, and it has all the logos of some very popular outlets. And you can just look at it visually and see, here's all the folks on the far left, here's the lean left, here's the center, the lean right, and the right. Other outlets in there, Vice, definitely, Huffington Post. I actually even want to pull it up so I can just read some of them off to you.
So surprising. I mean, it's like I didn't really necessarily think of them as right or left, really.
Yeah.
I thought of them more as just like really touchy-feely happy, with kind of like puts you on the left by default. Yeah. But
if you look at the way that they report on policy and politics, it becomes a lot clearer. Sometimes it's like, I've noticed that they'll be writing about some political happening, and the way they have framed it is just, it's so clear what they think, and it's so not, they're reporting on things that are happening in politics that'll lead you to believe that someone's evil or somebody's doing something, it'll just lead you down this path of thinking that, where I know conservatives that would not frame the issue that way, where, like, that's not actually what's going on to them.
Yeah. They're showing one side of a polarized argument.
Right. So some of the other far left outlets, CNN Opinion,
Really?
and we rate that
makes sense.
Yeah, we rate that distinct from CNN News. So the opinion page of CNN is far left. The Daily Beast, Mother Jones, the New Yorker, actually. The New York Times Opinion. Their editorial board is really far left. The Nation, which some outlets are pretty transparent about their bias.
Mm-hmm.
I believe The Nation and like Mother Jones pretty much bill themselves as being left outlets. And then Vox, far left. And
Yeah,
that's
well,
another.
just with a name like that, you're definitely far left.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what would be some examples of like leaning left? Like not hardcore bias, but like, yeah, we have an opinion.
Yeah. So BuzzFeed.
Oh,
BuzzFeed.
for sure. Yeah.
The New York Times.
Really? BuzzFeed doesn't pull as far left. I would have expected them to.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, it's some people probably think they're far left. We did an editorial review of them and, kind of took an aggregate of the opinions of people from all sides of the political spectrum. And we ended up deciding that they're lean left. But it's kind of one of those things where, I might think that they're far left, but we're trying to get, the average view of Americans, of people from all over the spectrum. So
and I think that's cool because you're taking into account elements that I haven't. So my bias on their bias isn't actually as calculated as what you're saying. So the fact that what you're saying isn't obvious, I think is actually gives it credit. I think it's cool.
Yeah, totally. And like I said, we look at a lot of different things, and we take into account like third-party data. There are researchers that there are people that have created sort of like numeric systems, and I won't go into the details of it, but they've created like a mathematical way to like determine the bias of media outlets. It's really interesting.
Cool.
Yeah. So, so lean left outlets. The Guardian is a popular one.
Okay.
NPR opinion page leans left. Their news is more center.
Wow, that's cool. That's good on them, honestly. If their opinions aren't far, it says a lot. That's cool.
Yeah. Politico actually leans left. That's one that I was surprised about. Well, I wasn't surprised. It's one of those things where like I used to think they were pretty center, and now when I read it, I'm like, okay, that's leaning left a little bit, just the way things are framed, the word choice, and that sort of thing. Time Magazine is lean left. The Atlantic as well.
Yeah, that one's pretty.
Okay. What was that?
Yeah, any other important ones to name? The ones that people are likely to read commonly and not know?
Yeah, the Washington Post. Lean left.
Washington Post is lean left. Okay, cool.
Another one that kind of surprised me because reading it for years, I was like, this is objective fact, this is, and now when I read it, I'm like, okay, that's leaning left.
Yeah, because you hear all these old timey stories of like shit like Watergate coming out and like real hardcore investigative journalism where like they do all kinds of stuff to get the truth to the people and like they're willing to fucking die for it. And it's like, wow, we've really come a long way.
Yeah. And part of it is the financial situation in the media industry, which we can talk about more. That's why you don't see
the spectrum. I definitely want to talk about that. Yeah. So what are some examples of right-leaning?
Right would be Fox News. Are we doing far right or lean right?
We're going all the way down the spectrum. So now we're right-leaning.
Okay. So far right is Breitbart.
No. Did I say far right? We're doing right-leaning.
Oh, okay. So leaning right, Fox News.
Really?
Well, we have data that shows that they used to be far right and are now leaning right.
Really?
Yeah, that was surprising to me as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's not a lot of lean right outlets, actually. A lot of them are not ones that I think are read by the majority of Americans. So like just throwing out a few others, like Reason Magazine is lean right. I don't think a lot of, I don't think they're one of the like, nationally popular. It's more like niche. Oh, okay, yeah. So I have friends that write at Reason. I really like Reason. But not as big of a household name as like the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post. The Wall Street Journal's opinion page is lean right. And then the others are there are there are other outlets, but they're just not as popular. The Washington Times, the Washington Examiner. I don't know if you read those. I do, but I didn't know about them until recently. It's more.
Yeah, I don't really know those too well.
Yeah. So honestly, like there aren't a ton of lean right. I mean, the most well-known one I would say would be Fox News.
Oh, God, that's really interesting. I would have pegged them as far right, like in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I know. That's surprising. And you can actually go to All Sides and we kind of break down what's changed over the years that we've decided to move them to lean right from far right. And it's all kind of, we're looking at this stuff, you know, in relation to other outlets. So, you know, is it that like other outlets are getting farther right? And so like, you know, political thought and the political spectrum is ever shifting, and it's interesting because some views that, you know, used to seem very liberal then suddenly seem conservative, and it's like all very contextual. I will say that the Fox News opinion page is far right. So if you're reading their opinion, far right. Or opinion.
Cool. So, well, that's really interesting that there don't seem to be that many widespread right leaning.
Yeah, it's the media landscape is very liberal. There is that is measurable. A lot of the most popular media outlets are lean left or left, the ones Americans have heard of, and I think that's a problem. There's been speculation as to why that is. Like, are journalists, are people who are liberal just more likely to become journalists?
Yeah, I mean, that does actually make sense. That doesn't.
Yeah.
So like, I'm going to do what's good for the world and like put myself in, you know, people on the right do that too. They got troops and shit. They're all about that. So who knows?
Yeah. It's interesting.
Anyway, okay. So what are some, I mean, I feel like they're super obvious, but what are some right leaning, far right news outlets?
Far right. Yeah. So, like I said, Fox News opinion, we have Breitbart as far right. There's been some, there's also been some talk at all sides about like, you know, like InfoWars, like, are they far right or are they like off the chart?
I personally think they're off the chart.
Yeah. Like we don't want to put it, we've talked about this and we're pretty transparent about this with our readers. Like, we don't feel comfortable all the time, like putting InfoWars next to the National Review as an example of a far right outlet, because there's clearly a difference there in the quality of reporting, in the how robust the arguments are, things like that. So we're still trying to come up with a way to convey that some of these, are more extreme outlets that are, off the chart, so to speak.
Okay. So, you know what I just realized we didn't cover? Okay, so I want to make sure we go over this. So we got Breitbart, we got Fox Opinion. Yeah. What are some other ones?
The National Review.
Far right.
Yeah, we have them as far right.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're pretty conservative. You read them, that's pretty clear.
Are there any big ones that we might not know about that, like, maybe we kind of take for granted?
That most Americans know about and read?
Yeah.
That's another thing, is like the right end of the spectrum is just, I would say outlets that like the majority of Americans are like. When you think of the media, you think of like ABC, CNN, like, you know, and there's just not a lot on the right. We have like the Daily Caller on the far right. I think
when I think of right news, I either think of Fox News, Breitbart, or I think of YouTube.
YouTube? Is that what you said?
Yeah, not the page itself, but like the fact that like if you really want right-wing news, you can pretty much only get it from YouTube.
Yeah. So and that's how the media landscape is changing, because now, like you're saying, there are like channels emerging on YouTube that are creating they're using channels that are not traditional, like these other outlets. The ones I've been talking about, they're print, they're magazines, it's kind of like old media models. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're just going to see more and more big media outlets coming out of YouTube and like not being hosted on their own site even, or maybe they'll move in that direction. But yeah, you're right. I think that there's a lot of folks on YouTube that are right leaning, that are getting pretty popular, that are not magazines or print or even their own websites.
Yeah, because if I need to hear the opposite side of an argument and I need to hear the right-leaning side, YouTube is pretty much the first place I go.
Yeah, totally.
I have a handful of people. I listen to like a bunch of different versions of it, and I feel like I can kind of get an idea of what their opinion is.
Yeah.
You're right. On the left, it's like really fucking easy. You just Google it and it's everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you know what I just realized we didn't cover? We didn't cover the center.
The center, yeah. I was going to bring that up.
Favorite part.
Yeah. So it's interesting because one thing that I thought when I got to All Sides that was made clear to me when I was learning about our bias ratings is that center doesn't necessarily mean unbiased, but it does mean that they'll display both sides more equally than these other outlets.
So what would be an example of center but not unbiased?
I don't know if I could give an example of a specific outlet, but what we mean by that is more like there might be, I think the example I was given was like whenever like legalizing gay marriage was like a niche opinion, you could have like center outlets that are in the center, but they're not covering that, right?
Oh.
So they're biased because they're not even like looking at that, right?
So if they don't cover it, they don't have to cover a part of the argument that they don't like.
Yeah. Sort of bias by omission is a thing.
Oh, that's interesting.
You can have bias by omission and things like that and still have an outlet that, you know, what they are reporting on, they do a pretty good job of displaying both sides equally.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Okay. So what are some center media outlets?
So NPR, we rate center.
Cool.
And there's been some, I will say that some of the center outlets we've heard from our readers that people are concerned that they're going one way or the other. And we are keeping an eye. I think NPR is one of the ones we're sort of keeping an eye on because we've had some people write in and say, oh, I feel like they're going more left or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I always thought of them as. It was more left-leaning.
Yeah. So like, you know, it depends on your perspective. But for now, we don't have enough data to definitively say that they're lean left. And
which is a funny thing to do because I really like the thing that All Sides is doing is because, like, if you rate a bias of an outlet, you're going to rate it from a biased opinion.
Yeah, that's the thing is we understand that the people who are saying, well, CNN is left and Fox News is like, we're biased. We're all biased. So it is quite a challenge to get it right, you know, and we're definitely not claiming that like everyone's going to agree with all of our ratings. And in fact, you can go on our site and tell us that you agree or disagree with our ratings. We want to know what people think.
Cool.
Yeah, it's like every American is going to have a different idea of how to.
I noticed you actually on the site when I went to it that there was actually a way to test your bias.
Yes, we have a quiz that you can go in there, and before I even started at All Sides, I was encouraged to take that quiz, and and like as a new employee, they're like rate your bias. So yeah, you can go in there and
do you have bias? Do you feel comfortable telling me your bias?
I do. And it's on the website. We have it on our staff page. So when
really?
we're very transparent about the bias of everyone that works at All Sides.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah. So when I took that quiz, I got lean right. I took it again and got center. But you know, is the first, you know, like
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'd be curious what I'm going to do. Okay, so I'm going to take the test before our next call, and then I'll out myself on the next one.
Yeah. So I get lean right. I do. I like to think of myself as more center, but I think that, you know, I do lean right on a lot of issues. So
yeah, I like to think of myself the same way, but I definitely have strong opinions about some stuff.
Yeah.
It's funny because I consider myself center because I hate some things on the right and I hate some things on the left. So it's like, hey, that means I hate everybody. Good for me.
Yeah. I feel the same way, and I like to think that I can like see both sides. But I think that when it comes down to like policy and stuff like that, I do have a libertarian streak and maybe a more right-leaning streak.
Yeah, I mean, we both value personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's a very big, libertarian idea. And so I'm
Yeah.
probably going to lean more right than I think so, just because I value the individual over the collective. So
Exactly.
I would to skew that way as well.
Yeah, and things like the free market and just a general distrust of government, like handling large complex projects. For me.
Their
So
inability to do so, according to my bias. So,
yeah.
So I cut you off as you were naming some center media outlets. What are
Okay.
some more other than NPR?
Right. So we said NPR. Reuters is center.
I don't know that one.
Oh, interesting. So Reuters is, I believe, a wire outlet. Don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure. So they're pretty good at displaying both sides. Their reporting has remained pretty balanced over the years, which is great. USA Today gets a center rating.
USA Today?
Yeah. So the thing about USA Today is I wouldn't say that their reporting or their opinion pieces necessarily go super deep, but they do a good job of displaying both sides of an issue.
That's cool. That's good.
They'll interview the Democrat and then they'll interview the Republican, or they'll have an editorial that says Megyn Kelly shouldn't have been fired, and then they'll have one that says, that was absolutely the right decision. So they do a pretty good job of displaying both sides.
That's good to know.
Yeah. The Wall Street Journal, the news portion, their opinion page is lean right, but their news is center.
Cool.
And so their reporting is in the middle. Bloomberg and BBC.
Really? BBC center?
Yes. That's one we're pretty confident about. If you read their news coverage, they'll
cool. Because when I think of England in general, I think of a country just as divided as us.
Yeah.
So
and it might be, but this specific news outlet does a good job of portraying both sides equally.
That's really. Oh, where's Al Jazeera on all this? Did y'all count Al Jazeera?
Yeah, they're in the center. That was another one I was going to bring up.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good, because Al Jazeera and BBC have been ones that I've felt were trustworthy for a long time.
Yeah.
But it's cool to know that there's actually like a rating for it, and you can.
Yeah, there's some consent. Some people agree with you.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, cool.
Although, like I said, center doesn't necessarily mean it's the most trustworthy or the most unbiased, or it just means it's balanced.
Okay.
It's balanced.
Yeah, that's a good distinction, because I did just say trustworthy, and it doesn't.
Yeah. I have to catch myself thinking that as well sometimes. I'm like, oh, it's center, so it's like the best, but it's just, we're just trying to convey that the bias is not one-sided. It's they'll tell you what's going on both ends.
And it's just so funny to see that how, because I consider myself in the center, and so therefore I have a bias that center is better. That somehow that's virtuous and righteous and good, and yay, for me, I'm in the center.
Yep. I fall into that as well. Yeah. I'm like, oh, I can see both sides. So, so great. It's center can be biased.
Good to know.
The Hill and Associated Press is another one I want to bring up, because the Associated Press is a wire service, meaning you can be reading the Huffington Post and you're reading an article that was written by the Associated Press. So their content is just all over the media. Lots of other outlets run their content. So, that's good to know. The Associated Press is center, but that's another one where we were getting some readers writing in and saying, we're worried that they're going left. Could you do a review? And we did a review during Brett Kavanaugh's fiasco, that media circus.
Yeah.
Didn't give us a very good sense of how the Associated Press normally operates. We're going to revisit it because that was going on for weeks and it was dominating the news. So it was hard for us to comb through all that content and find stuff that wasn't about him and really look at their bias. So that's one we're keeping an eye on. But right now they're rated center.
Okay, so now we're going to get to the fun stuff we've been waiting for. Let's talk about the impact that this bias has and what drives the bias in the first place. Like before the call, we were talking, or even on this, we were talking about sales falling and that driving a very biased perspective. So what can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what's always been true in media is, things like sensationalism and basically getting people to feel a type of way about what they're reading will get a response, right? If you're like, that's ridiculous. You're looking at the newsstand and there's a headline screaming at you and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel some type of way about that.
That's my pearls.
Yeah, maybe you're going to buy it and like dig into that. And it just kind of like feeds our emotional centers to read ridiculous things, right? Or to read things that even invoke fear in us. Like, oh, should I be worried? I think most people know that the media does often try to make us fearful so that we'll get hooked on watching them or reading them to, see what's going to happen. So basically, the media has always had, these types of issues. You've had like yellow journalism, which is or muckraking, like things like this that have always existed in print journalism. It's just dredging up stuff that's, not necessarily, it's meant to paint a certain picture. And it's not necessarily that like objective fact-based material that we've been talking about a lot. So media has always had this problem, but what's happened is now that things are moving online, a big way that media outlets make money is through selling ads. And how do you measure the effectiveness of your ads? Well, how many eyeballs are looking at it? So, or how many people are clicking on it? So how do you measure eyeballs? You measure it through clicks, page views, how many people are actually like clicking on our content. And couple that with the fact that a lot of people are getting their media consumption through the funnel of Facebook and Google, then the media outlets have to, if they want to compete, if they want to draw people to their site, they have to use clickbait. They have to use headlines that are really going to get people to feel a type of way so they click, right? Because if it's like, if Trump erupted yesterday, I want to know what did he erupt over? That's crazy. I feel, maybe I feel scared or maybe I feel shocked or whatever. I feel a type of way, so I'm going to click on that.
And it works on both sides because it's like someone on the right seeing that would be like, oh, what are these fucking leftists coming up with now? Let me figure this out. And
on the right is,
oh my God, what did he do?
Yeah. And exactly. I don't mean to, and there's my bias. I've consumed so much left news that those are the examples that come to mind, but the right does it too. Because it's like, so-and-so destroys the feminist activist or whatever, like that type of language, right?
Ben Shapiro's whole career.
Yeah, basically. So it's that type of language, and I'm even using extreme examples. It's employed in even more, in ways that are more subtle, but that are still misleading. And I would love to like start collecting examples and just like create. We can do another show where we like dig into that in more depth. But anyway, back to your original question, which was the impact and how we got here.
Yeah, and I want to ask a follow-up question to that because I remember reading an article you wrote about how it drives violence.
Yes. So in October, there were a string of violent incidents that were in the news. Someone sent bombs to...
The pipe bombs?
What's that?
The little pipe bomb things?
Yeah, I think, to prominent Democrats. Obama, Clinton. There was also someone who pleaded guilty to sending white powder to Trump's sons. There was the Pittsburgh shooting. There was one other incident, and I cannot remember what it was, but basically all these incidents, what they had in common is that they were political. They were acts of political violence, where if you looked at the motivations of the perpetrators, they were politically motivated, and a lot of them were expressing extremist views online. So on their social media accounts, they were sharing a lot of content where they had either far left or far right views. And basically what happens is when we have a super biased media, one that reinforces our ideas about things, where we're only consuming content that tells us what we want to hear. Basically that creates divisions in our mind where, the other side is always wrong, and they might even be the cause of all of our problems. Right. So this type of divisiveness in the individual mind, fueled by the media, creates violence in the world, because there are going to be people that think that violence is, how we need to solve it. Like these people are the cause of our problems, so we need to fight back, right?
And that makes sense. It's like if you, let's say you're on the left and you think that like Trump is an actual, Nazi, and you think every single one of his supporters is some white supremacist Nazi, and then you see accounts of actual white supremacist Nazis like doing horrible things, and you're like, oh my God, this proves all of my shit right. I need to go and like kill some of these people. Or on the opposite, if you think it's a fucking communist revolution that's brewing and you see Antifa fighting people in the streets, then maybe you go kill some people.
Yeah, because people are wanting to defend what they believe is necessary for us to have a healthy and like functioning society. Like people feel deeply threatened by the views of others, and when that's just reinforced and you are unable to like really just like understand where they're coming from, then you're going to want to like retaliate. Or not everyone, but some people do. It creates this divide.
Enough people to cause problems.
What's that?
Enough people to cause problems.
Yeah. So this is where, we get into a lot of stuff around, like whose responsibility is it to ensure that we get a balanced news diet? Is it the responsibility of the media? Is it the responsibility of our technology platforms? Is it the responsibility of the individual consumer?
Yeah, that's big, because, at that point, because this is getting into the psychology of it, because at that point, in order to ask a populace to take that upon themselves to do that, you're asking them to have the emotional intelligence required to value an opinion that is terrifying to them.
Yeah.
And to look past that fear and be willing to do that on a regular basis.
Right.
And I don't think that's nearly as common. So I hate the idea of feeling like it should be done for us, but at the same time, it requires a certain skill that very few people will ever even develop. So that is a really tricky, complicated question.
Yeah, I agree. And I've fallen on both sides of it at different points in my life. Like, no, it's the individual's responsibility to consume balanced news and think for themselves. And that's true to some degree, but then there is the reality of what you just said, which is that a lot of people don't have those skills or just aren't even aware that it's something that they ought to be doing.
So what this makes me think is that what we could do as a culture is shift to where we actually value this, which is, I think, what you and I are doing now, is having conversations and giving people a way to look at things that actually shows this thing in a positive light. And we didn't do it on this call. Actually, we did with the violence, but also show what happens if you don't do this.
Right.
Because I don't think a lot of people know. It's like, oh, if I don't want to listen to these fucking reprobates over here, that's not going to have any negative impact on me. That's only going to have negative impact on them because I'm suffocating their platform. So fuck them.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there is this phenomena of when you ignore stuff, and we talked about this a little on the last episode, when you ignore things that you don't want to confront, you make them bigger. And especially in the realm of political discourse, it's like, if you say, no, your views are so horrible, you're not allowed to speak, that's just going to make that person go, well, I feel even more emboldened in my views now. Now I really need people to hear me. And it makes it grow bigger, but like in the shadows. So,
and then people that were kind of close to them, but not really, they get fired up and they're like, what the fuck happened, bro? There really is a conspiracy against us. We gotta get it together now. And blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So, to be completely honest, I think that's why a lot of people voted for Trump.
Yeah.
Is because this type of stuff was happening. It's like people were getting treated a certain way and they were like, oh, I don't know that I don't like this, but like I'm not what you're calling me. So like this is the closest thing to what I want to be. So it's like I don't like it, but I'll vote for it because at least they're nicer to me.
Yeah. Or because I want to get back at the thing that is repressing me.
Yes, there's a lot of reactivity and people being like, you hurt my feelings, and so I'm going to vote for this person that I don't even like just to get back at these people that I don't even know anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very difficult. So what can we do on a personal level to kind of deal with this?
I mean, I always tell people to consume balanced news, to be media literate, to learn what that means, and consume media with a critical eye. And that's so hard to do because we don't even realize when we're consuming media in a way that we're just confirming our biases. It's so hard to like get above that. But I think the first step to that is not shunning ideas or people or worldviews that you disagree with, and just engage. And look at it and think about it, and you'll come away either I think it's likely that you'll come away with more of an understanding of like what is going on the other side, why people feel that way, which will put a temper on the polarization and the divisiveness that we're seeing in our media and in individuals, and reflected in the violence and all those things.
So you said a word, you said media literacy.
Yeah.
I want to find a way to spell out what that means. So people who understand this conceptually but still don't know actually what to do, like what would a day of, or a session of getting balanced news or being media literate, what does that look like? And like you're sitting down at your computer and you're like, I'm going to look at the news in a balanced way. What do I do?
Yeah. So AllSides is a good tool for this because AllSides is doing some of the work for you. Because what it actually looks like to begin to become media literate is to get on your computer and maybe open like 3 or 4 different home pages of media outlets that are all over the map politically. Don't open Huffington Post and Vice and Vox. Those are all going to agree with each other. Open Huffington Post and Fox News and like Al Jazeera, and like just read a lot of it. And this is more work than we want to put in, I think, especially if we don't have a lot of time. But I would say for every news article that you read another one coming from a different outlet.
That's great.
And you'll start to notice threads of consistency and threads of inconsistency, and then total gaps where you're going to you'll have questions that neither of them are really talking about, something deeper, right? So
that's great. And I like that you said that, because it can seem daunting and overwhelming. I remember like when I was like 19 or whatever, I had a friend who was a political science major, and he was my guy that I would go to for all my stuff. I was the psychology guy. He was the politics guy.
Yeah.
And he would tell me about how he would get all his news. And I'm like, don't you do anything else? Like, what the hell, man? And
Yeah.
now that I realize how important it is to be balanced and informed in my opinions, it actually doesn't take that long.
Yeah.
You know, I do it, like I get my news generally either basically right when I wake up or right before bed. Like those are my times that I learn things and it doesn't take that long, especially like if you just find something that you're interested in and you want to know the truth. And that's another thing is you have to want to know the truth.
Yes. Totally.
And you have to, and there's another thing that we kind of went into, but didn't go too super far into, is you have to know the downsides of not pursuing the truth.
Yes.
You have to know what the fuck is going to happen to you on a very personal, psychological level if you don't balance out. And I don't think that's talked about. I don't think that's valued. I don't think people are aware of the psychological and physical dangers that they're putting themselves into by not looking at these things.
Yeah. And I totally agree. I have personal stories of things that happened to me when I was refusing to do this. Stories for another day. But yeah, there are actual impacts to your life, I think, if you keep certain things in the shadows or refuse to look at certain things.
Like it can be devastating. You know? So I've been studying the psychology of the political spectrum, and I'm not going to go into detail on it because my study is very broad, but the general idea is that people on the left are pretty bad at boundaries, and people on the right are more concerned with things like safety and protection and things like that. So these people are more, the people on the left are more creative, they're more open, they're more into complexity and things like that, but they're shitty at boundaries.
Yeah.
And the people on the right are more interested in boundaries and safety and loyalty and all these things, but they don't think creatively and they're not as empathetic. And so
not as open.
Yeah, and so on a psychological level, that creates very big problems because a lot of my left-wing friends have bad anxiety because they don't know how to set boundaries. And so it's very possible for your mental and psychological pain that you're dealing with to be correlated to your political views.
Right.
And then my people on the right are so adamant about their personal freedoms and their personal whatever, and like they should be able to do whatever the fuck they want, that a lot of times they're just unempathetic. And they alienate people, and they're difficult to be around at times.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree.
Plus, it's like, how the fuck good are your relationships if you're not empathetic? And how good are you taking care of yourself if you don't have empathy? And like, there's very real psychological downsides to having an unbalanced view of these things. And I don't think we're looking at that.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's like hard for, sometimes I'm like, oh, well, liberals, they don't have any boundaries, so that leads to chaos, like in their mental state, right?
Sure.
But they're having a lot of fun, and sometimes conservatives don't seem like they're having a lot of fun because they're so concerned about safety.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a rigid view, and their views are more rigid. But you do need both, right?
Mm-hmm.
And both sides have something to learn from each other, and that's what's really like at the core of media literacy and media bias, and understanding media bias and understanding how to consume the media is you'll learn to appreciate what both sides have to offer and applying that. And there's that saying, the personal is political, is totally true. Like everything going on in politics is very related to us individually and in our individual lives. We can deny that, but our ideas about politics and the world and how we ought to structure the world and what we need to value and how we ought to navigate these complex problems that come along with being human, those ideas are operating in your day-to-day individual life and are reflected in how you think the collective ought to be. And so, I totally think it's a really good point that you made, that like, you can have anxiety if you don't have enough boundaries, but you can also have rigidity or lack of empathy if you're too rigid. So,
and those same problems go on to the macro as well, because it's like, okay, I'm bad at boundaries, therefore, like, I'm not setting boundaries with my lovers and my friends and my coworkers and my boss. But I also believe in no borders in the country. And so the problems from not having good boundaries in your personal life are very similar to the problems that can come up from not having boundaries.
Exactly.
Whereas on the other side, having too strong boundaries will give you the exact same fucking problems on the macro scale that it will on the micro scale.
Yep.
And so if you're someone who gives a shit at least about yourself and your own mental well-being, then it's it's good to balance out a little bit.
Yeah, totally. And it's hard because I think the human brain has the propensity for extremes.
Mm-hmm.
Like I catch myself going too far to one side or going too far to the other side. And it's a constant like need to keep myself in check and make sure I'm not ignoring something or that, and just integrating the validity of both and learning how to, kind of walk that middle line where I think we can find a lot of peace in the middle if we can just balance and just see what both sides have to offer. It's not easy, but yeah, we like would have a lot of peace on the individual and collective level if we could at least value balance.
Yes. If nothing else, for the fact that you're not mad and getting in fights all the time.
Yeah.
Even that's just a giant fucking stress reliever. It's like, I'm not angry at this person. I'm not angry at this person. I don't get angry every time I see the news, and I don't fight against this thing, and it's not spiking my cortisol levels, and I can sleep well at night because I don't worry about this shit as much. And and that's not to say that you don't take the issue seriously, because obviously we're sitting here devoting our time after we both put in a full day of work to talk about this, have our views out there to be picked apart. Like it's not that we don't have a stance. We're not apathetic. It's just that middle is a stance.
Yeah. It's valid too. And I've heard people say, oh, centrist is a cop-out. It's like, no, it's not. It to me, displays psychological maturity.
Yeah, I think so too. Because that literally is what it is. In order to balance out these two drives of taking care of myself and taking care of others, like in the ability to do that is what makes a person whole.
Yeah.
Because like we said, you care too much about other people, and next thing you know, you're getting walked on, and you actually end up resenting the people that you were taking care of.
Yeah.
And then over here, it's like, we already went over that.
Yeah.
So cool. I'm glad we got to go into the psychology of all this. And I think we've been going for close to an hour, so I'm going to want to cut it off soon just to make this somewhat digestible. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to go over?
No, not really. I think that was a good kind of 101 version of media bias and where some of these media outlets are at right now. And people should definitely go to All Sides and like type in your favorite media outlet and see how we rate them. And then maybe find one that's the opposite and start reading that.
Yeah, and if you guys want to post your biases down there and we can have a discussion about all of our biases, I think that would be super fun.
Yes, totally.
All right. So, and also, if anybody has any topics you want us to cover, I'm sure between the two of us, we haven't really discussed a bunch, but I'm sure we have a bunch of ideas.
Yeah, even just through this conversation, I'm like, well, there's so much more I could get into around this.
Especially like just the psychology of it, and specifically how not looking at this stuff fucks people. Like, I think that is specifically important just because we're all selfish. And if we can see how we're actually hurting ourselves and it's in our best interest to do this other thing, we might be more likely to do it.
Yeah. There's a lot to talk about around civility as well. Like, how do you actually tolerate beliefs that you disagree with fundamentally? Like, how do we coexist?
I would love to hear you talk about that, because you're actually better at that than I am.
I hope. I mean, yeah, it's
I'm too sarcastic. I like to make fun of things too much. You keep a much more level head. I'm always impressed when you tell me stories about your conversations, or when I like stumble on them on Facebook. I'm like, fucking A, she's doing better at this than I am.
I've had a lot of practice.
Yeah, all right, cool. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I'm really glad we get to do this, and every time around is even better. Totally. I agree. And here's to many more. Lots more to talk about. And thank anybody who's watching this all the way through an hour in, because Christ, that's cool of you. So we'll see you next time.